here welcoming a former Foothill student who recently completed her MPhil, which means master's degree at Cambridge University. So she's gone on to wonderful things. Maria Azhunova, Cambridge. But if you want to know where she's speaking from, if you look at the map of Mongolia, which is so nicely clear for us, just north of Mongolia, you'll see the very gigantic Lake Baikal, the largest, oldest, deepest lake in the world, 400 miles long. And she's speaking from the city of Ulan-Ude, which is basically between the southern tip of Lake Baikal and Mongolia. So that is where we are joined today for Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month at Foothill College. Maria, welcome back to Foothill College virtually from Ulan-Ude in the Republic of Buryatia in Russia.
Hi Scott. Greetings, friends.
So Maria is part of a global movement to bring indigenous wisdom and indigenous knowledge and indigenous conservation practices to the forefront. And I can't tell you how proud I am of you, Maria. I think that the work you're doing is some of the most important on the planet.
To the left, you can see a picture of the Boread people from the western side of Lake Baikal. Now, I would like to talk about my Foothill College journey. I was enrolled as a full-time student since 2009 up to 2011. And I just, if it wasn't for Foothill College, I just don't think a lot of my other educational journeys or professional journeys would even happen. Fast forward up till 2016, I graduated. I was able to bring some of my family to this graduation. You can see that I'm wearing a traditional Boread dress. I work at a non-government organization called Baikal Buryat Center for Indigenous Cultures. And on the left are my teammates, my co-workers, and to the right, we presented at the UN's Indigenous Peoples Forum a couple of years ago. If you describe it in 2 sentences, it's conservation of biocultural diversity. And when in a lot of indigenous worldviews, and especially in Boread worldview, nature, culture, and human, we are one, and we're interlocked in the golden interweave called Altan Khohi. So therefore, when you conserve culture, right, traditional indigenous culture, you also influence conservation of nature, of environment, of wildlife, of landscape, and therefore yourself, right, yourself as a person. And when you look at the UN Declaration on Indigenous People, it's a tiny document, right? It's so small, but every single letter, like every single comma, period, is written in blood, basically in blood of indigenous people. So, which means like when we're talking about hundreds of years of colonization, of murder, of repression, oppression, of genocide, and yet all of this sacrifice and the battle is not over yet. The battle is just it's only beginning for indigenous people worldwide, and it's about reclaiming with your ancestral lands, your sacred sites, your cultural maybe artifacts, your natural territories, so you could live the way your ancestors did. So the battle is ongoing worldwide, and I feel like that's why I'm part of the organization that is basically that fights the battle too, as I don't think I have any other choice. Having said that, everything's interconnected. It's important to start with intergenerational transfer of indigenous knowledge, because if you can't transfer that knowledge and your traditions, then that's it. You're gonna die as a culture and as a nation, really. So one of our projects that we're really proud of, and it's really fun, it's Nomadic School of Creativity, and it's a summer camp, and sometimes winter camps too, for urban children, mostly urban indigenous children, who don't have access to traditional knowledge, to express traditionally culture.
Maria Azhunova, former Foothill student, went then from there to Harvard, and then, well, as we'll find out soon, Cambridge. But if you want to know where she's speaking from, if you look at the map of Mongolia, which is so nicely clear for us, just north of Mongolia, you'll see the very gigantic Lake Baikal, the largest, oldest, deepest lake in the world, 400 miles long. And she's speaking from the city of Ulan-Ude, which is basically between the southern tip of Lake Baikal and Mongolia. So that is where we are joined today for Asian Pacific Islander Heritage Month at Foothill College.
We are gathered to create a new form of conservation of snow leopard and its ecosystem and its habitat through the revival of traditional indigenous knowledge. And it's a network of scientists, researchers, non-government organizations, conservation organizations, educators, schools, the list goes on, and which is led by cultural practitioners or shamans or spiritual leaders. Now, one of our partners, they created this initiative in Western Mongolia with the school children to create a play which says "In Search of the Baby Snow Leopard," and you can see that the school children. They wrote the script, produced the play, and it was really successful. So they traveled all the way through the Western Mongolia with this play to different schools. It was a huge success. It was it's not just a play, but also an awareness of the endangered snow leopard and its ecosystems and the importance of conservation of this sacred animal. My organization, right, PPCIC, we were able to present an interactive seminar with both Mongolian children that we brought and local rural children and we just posed a question: what would be what did Earth look like 100 years ago, right, in 1920? What does Earth look like now in 2020? And how Earth is going to look like 100 years from now. And it shows that children are aware of the massive changes that is happening throughout the planet. I'm convinced that children are not given enough credit, and if you communicate with them like you would communicate with adults or anyone else, and ask their opinion and have them to be part of the solution, that's where we're going to see changes. So on the right, we have an elder. He is the geneticist, he's the scientist. He was discussing the importance of preserving traditional Boread heritage, traditional Boread pastoralist practice. So my people were traditionally nomadic pastoralists, meaning we would travel from one place to another place with animals, cattle. We had goats, sheep, cows, horses, and camels. And all of these animals were always part of the ecosystem, and using traditional pastoral management, people were aware not to degrade Earth, but rather be part of the landscape. You never exhaust the soil, right? The animals, because being part of the ecosystem, would benefit the said ecosystem. Very powerful to have this elder, who also happens to be a scientist, to speak in Boread language. And Boread language is endangered. It is estimated by UNESCO that it will disappear by 2050, so like in less than 20 years. It will be completely gone, but nevertheless, he was speaking Buryat, and because Buryat and Mongolian languages are quite similar, Mongolian children could understand it as well. So it was absolutely incredible.
We're here for the 50th anniversary of Earth Day tomorrow. And where is this conversation in American education? Who is asking you, what was the planet like in 1920? What is the planet like now? What will the planet be like in 2020? And I hope that you've been asked that in your own education here in the United States, since that's where most of you are joining us. But I'm sad to say, I don't think this conversation comes up nearly enough. And it's very inspiring that Maria is engaging elders and scientists and youth in their own indigenous language to ask this question. But where is that question in our own culture?
My people were traditionally nomadic pastoralists. We were traveling with our animals from place to place, and we had a purpose, and we knew which season would be appropriate for a particular place, and how to use natural resources wisely. Never take anything more than you can, than you should. And in this culture, tremendous importance was given to the cow because it gives us milk and meat. As the Soviets, they completely wiped out our Aboriginal cow. They brought a European breed of cow, the ones that everybody's hating on right now, that contributes to that so-called contributing to climate change and such. But the thing is, with our cow, with Boread cow, it was always part of the landscape. It does not require a lot of resources. It's just it grazes freely. It finds its own food, and then then its droppings. It fertilizes the earth, and the benefits are enormous. And the cow, it does not require to be any outside antibiotics, or it does not require much of energy, because it can just basically be outside even in the toughest winters. So it's perfectly adaptable to the very harsh climate that we always had. It was thought to be completely extinct in Russia, but luckily that elder that I talked about, who he's a geneticist, he's a scientist, and he found them in Mongolia, because during the Soviet persecution, several Boread families were able to escape the persecution, and they escaped to Mongolia with those animals, and that's and where they settled. It was next to a very big lake, Lake Hupsagul, and on the other side was this high mountains. So that's how the breed's purity was intact for a lot of many years. Kind of long story short, he was able to bring about 100 animals, 100 cows back to Buryatia in 2015. And that's where my organization stepped in. We helped to organize and the DNA analysis for each cow, which was performed by a genetic institute in Moscow. So now we have a clear picture of which cow is related to whom, and now we are able to breed them accordingly. So it's not so let's say one bull is not related to 5 cows, therefore they've been formed into a group. And this really kind of meticulous and work was done last year. Yes, thank you. You see now that they're baby cows. We just so the baby cows are born this year according to the table that I'm holding on the top right. So and this means that right now we have about 400 heads of, coming from 100 to 400. It's a pretty good result. And the idea behind this project is that not only the cow as a species will be revived, it's going to revive traditional herding practices. A lot of Buryat people express interest into returning to the traditional way of life, but it's very difficult to do so without the original animals. And that's where we are. We're bringing those original animals back. And then while the population reaches at least 3,000 or at least 1,000 females, that's when we're going to redistribute the cows to those who are interested, and then we'll have the network growing.
Core to the mission of what Maria is trying to accomplish as an international indigenous culture and wisdom leader is that the Boread people, for thousands and thousands and thousands of years, long before the Russian colonizers arrived in the late 1600s, they practiced these nomadic herding methods, and the land thrived, and it was fully sustainable, and the culture was sustainable, the ecosystem was sustainable. And so they have an indigenous knowledge base of how to make these lands thrive again. They have the rescue package. They have the knowledge that we need. They've always had the knowledge that we need. It's really a matter of listening to them. And this is one of the rare and beautiful instances, I wish it was not so rare, in which an animal which was thought to be extinct was discovered to be still existing and can be reintroduced, and with tremendous healing power for a very large region of the planet. As the Buryat lands, as Maria has mentioned, extend across 5 different current nation states. This contribution is a tremendous contribution to healing the planet, and a great sort of little birthday message. So thanks for that, Maria.
Katı sularlı, katı oğurlardı atayı değil. Çıganda yangan cugum candır. Bu, men Altaydın jerinden gelgem, sağ Altaydın jerinden.
And I was a scientist, and I was a little skeptical about this. But I have realized, working 30, 40 years in the field, that the local people really are the guardians of that habitat and that species. And unless we have them behind us, we are not going to succeed. For the members of the land of the snow leopard, what I really think is that they have a key role to play in snow leopard conservation. And the reason I say that is that they live out in the mountains, they see what is going on, whereas the wildlife department officials or the national park officials are in the office most of the time. And so their eyes and ears are not in the mountain. For LOSL, the eyes and the ears are in the mountain all the time.
We very first met Norbu Lama in 2010, and Norbu explained to us that the snow leopard was a protector of their Soyot people, and this was the first time we had ever met people who had this spiritual connection to the snow leopard.
Ну, прежде всего, снежный барс это связано с воспоминанием моего учителя. Перед самым уходом моего учителя мы вместе встретили снежного барса. Вот, после традиционного праздника почитания горы Мункос-Редак, его хозяина Мункос Буренхана. После этого праздника вот мы ехали обратно, и недалеко от этого места, где проходит сам молебен, на дорогу выскочил снежный барс. Это ущелье Темелик, где река Иркут протекает. В одном таком красивом месте, вот, где прижим, скалы вплотную к дороге подходят. В этом месте вот выскочил снежный барс на дорогу. Здоровый самец. Вот таким образом у нас вот стояла встреча с снежным барсом. Вот это. В течение 30 минут, наверное, где-то мы наблюдали за ним. Ну, вот, на расстоянии где-то 40-50 метров, вот, буквально рядом. Он никак не испугался, стоял, позировал, буквально в смысле там, то есть, ну вот. И я видел, как, ну, учитель был погружен в некое состояние. Он молчал и смотрел, и вот какая-то связь вот происходила ведь, с этим, с барсом. Ну и вот после всего он потихоньку начал подниматься в горы, ну и вот пока вот хвостом не махнул там на самом гребне там и исчез там в горах. После этого учитель, он сказал, что хозяева этих местностей, вот, в знак того, что мы на правильном пути, он показал самое сокровенное, редкое, что есть в этих местах. В этом проекте по спасению снежного барса и горных экосистем привлекает нас как культурных практиков. Это, по сути, инновационный подход именно в решении именно защиты природы и вообще всего феномена жизни. То есть традиционные знания, они необходимы для человечества. Потому что все-таки вот эта наша человеческая цивилизация, она многие вещи забывает, а коренные народы, они сохранили эти знания.
We also work with a shaman in the Altai Republic who is the hereditary guardian of the Snow Leopard Mountain. It's actually called Irbis 2.
Снежный барс там находится зимой и летом, и кругом он сейчас больше стал еще. Размножается еще. Снежный барс до сих пор есть. С этого снежного барса от природы мои предки жили связаны были животными эти снежного барса. Они не допускали чужих людей туда. Они не убивали козероги, где он питается, ходит. Эти мои родовые горы Ирбисту, мы до сих пор этих поклоняемся. Поклон, низкий поклон.
Здравствуй, Ирбис. Я очень рада, что могу написать тебе письмо. Меня зовут Полина, и я учусь в 3 классе. Я очень люблю животных, и мне очень жалко их, так как среди нас, людей, много охотников и браконьеров, которые безжалостно убивают животных. И поэтому многие занесены в Красную книгу, и вы, Ирбисы, тоже. Дорогой Ирбис, я хочу извиниться за тех людей, которые не понимают, что наносят ущерб животному миру, а значит и всей природе.
Very eloquent at the beginning of the talk about how service learning at Foothill College became part of your life as a student and how that was transformative in terms of making friends and connecting with the campus. And of course, you were helping other people at the same time. But students and community members, if you would like to help out, the Snow Leopard Conservancy, as Maria just mentioned, is based in Sonoma, just north of the Golden Gate Bridge.
In 2017, I was admitted to the Cambridge University Masters in Conservation Leadership program. First, it was on one hand, a lot of things were new and it was interesting. There were a lot of things I personally very disagreed with, given that the program was taught by the leading conservationists, Western conservationists today. But when it came to indigenous issues, there were practically obviously no representation of that, and no discussion of the importance of fighting or supporting indigenous groups. And because very often, kind of like the old school, the traditional conservation school of thoughts, which is practiced very widely today, says that indigenous people were kind of like part of the problem, that we should be kind of like moved away. For example, if it's a corridor, it's an elephant corridor somewhere in Africa, and then a village happens to be next to it with indigenous people. Let's move indigenous people away and make room for the elephants. But this particular thinking is very, very dangerous, not only from the human rights perspective, but also through the conservation perspective, because for thousands of years, the people coexisted with said elephants, and they formed a certain relationship, with each other, and the interconnection has happened. And when you break that down, just because WWF, let's say, said so, this leads to very, very tragic results, I would say. And not just, obviously I'm kind of simplifying, but that's what I've that's the cases, unfortunately. The thoughts and the culture in the kind of bigger conservation organizations today. I don't know, I was very outspoken about this, but nevertheless, it was an interesting, wonderful experience. I also made lots of friends, and I was still working at my organization while going, but I was there on campus throughout the whole time, of course, because you couldn't really leave and do it online. But I just couldn't leave because we were still working on our proposals and doing other stuff. So it was very difficult to balance the kind of full-time study and my job, but that has to be done, and I'm glad that that is over. So, but very grateful for the experience, of course, nevertheless. And next slide, please.
Okay, and I'll put in my 2 cents, Maria, which is that this is also a huge issue in North America as well. If you think about Yosemite, our most famous national park here in California, one of the world's most famous national parks, that was originally established by a military expedition that was sent to conquer and imprison the Awanichi people who had taken refuge in what is now the park. And so in Yosemite, in Lake Tahoe, which I write about a great deal, the Washoe people, their tribal homeland was Lake Tahoe, just as your tribal homeland was Lake Baikal. And the Washoe people presently have no tribal land rights whatsoever, and they're anywhere on the shores of their own sacred lake. So this exclusion of indigenous people is not something that just happens, let's say, in Russia or Mongolia, Tajikistan. This is something that's an enormous and ongoing issue here in the United States, and something really to be aware of. And Maria has always had this amazing ability to speak out, even under difficult circumstances. So it's very Maria, I must say, that there in Cambridge, and of course, as you say, you learned a great deal, but I think they learned from you also. And there's a fundamental shift, I hope, going on now in the conservation community to listen to indigenous voices. You could hear it in the voice of that biologist in the film that you played for us, that he was initially quite skeptical, but learned deeply that the snow leopards will not survive if the indigenous culture doesn't survive, and vice versa. Okay, back to you.
Yeah, thank you. So that kind of brings me to the end of my presentation today. I don't know, I just put up some references just in case. It's just a habit I picked up at both Foothill and Harvard, just reference everything.
Yes.
Reference everything.
Since I have to make so many of you do works cited, notice that Maria, with her degree from Harvard and now from Cambridge, is still doing references, and it matters when you're fighting these fights because people will tell you don't know what you're talking about. Where are your sources? What are you citing? And this is part of your armor as a scholar when you fight real battles. It's not just some annoying trick that we came up to make your life miserable and inconvenient in 1C. This is part of your essential armor as a scholar. It is absolutely essential. So Maria, of course, knows that because she's out there actually fighting these fights on behalf of her people, on behalf of the snow leopards, on behalf of the planet. Okay, and now I think we could probably start going to some questions.
Sam, go ahead.
Audience.
Yeah, hi, my name is Sam, student in Scott's class. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, can you unblock your video
Excellent.
too?
Oh, that's okay. So my question, and this is something I've asked, just different people who are either part of an Indigenous group or advocating for Indigenous groups, is that if you suddenly had sweeping international powers, what would you do now, moving forward, recognizing we can't change the past, to move forward to best position the Buryat in the world? If you look at the groups that are outside of the Republic, you look at, we talked a lot about, the land, back in the Republic, and, I think can anticipate what a lot of the goals are there. But if you were to look at the culture and the people as a whole, what would you want to see?
So if I understood correctly, you're asking my vision of the ideal future for Indigenous people or for Buryat people?
Yes, for the Boread people specifically.
Yeah. So, the thing is that the probably one of the biggest challenges is that my people are not recognized as Indigenous people in Russia, because Russia has their own definition of Indigenous people, and it's small numbered Indigenous people, and the population of Buryats it's a little under 500,000. So, but on every other definition, you look at the UN Declaration of Indigenous, people's rights, and internationally there's no definition, but there is a set of recommendations or systems. And first of all, it's a self-identification, and then geographically, you've been in this territory for so long, pre-colonial or pre-annexation, and then you're culturally and physically attached to this particular land and landscape. Therefore, you are Indigenous. But the problem is that my people in particular, we are not recognized as such. And we are denied certain rights, for example, that other Indigenous groups that are defined as Indigenous in Russia have, hunting, fishing, and etc. So they have a little bit more rights on that. But in the ideal world, first of all, we do have this recognition as Indigenous people, and as such, we are able to create the territory of traditional pastoralism, because, as I said, even though the cow project is very challenging, there are people that are interested in kind of going back to the traditional roots. And the other problem is that, as I said, the language is also disappearing, because throughout the Soviet Union, the language was banned. Basically, the culture was banned, the religious practices was banned. And in my ideal vision is that, again, because everything is interconnected, people go back to traditional way as much as possible. But then you have the cow, and then the Buryat language itself, it's so connected to, to the, domestic animals, to the wildlife, to the surrounding ecosystem. And the forgotten words, the forgotten concepts, right, in both language-wise and culture-wise, will be revived as well. So in my ideal vision, bring back pastoralism, thematic pastoralism, using the traditional methods and practices will revive all those other things, and that's where we live happily ever after. If that makes sense. Yeah.
I can add, Maria, I know this about you, that Maria's working hard with other groups to hope to establish centers for the study of indigenous knowledge at various universities worldwide. And this is my class is about paradigm shifts, and this would be a major paradigm shift in institutions of higher learning worldwide. And there needs to be centers for the study of indigenous knowledge. And Maria is one of the leaders in attempting to establish these things. The problem is that institutions remain largely tone deaf and blind to the depth of wisdom and the depth of knowledge, real knowledge as defined as an academic, conservation knowledge, cultural knowledge, ecological wisdom that the indigenous peoples have preserved for centuries and centuries and centuries, and really waiting to be asked essentially how to help, because they know how to help. And it's a question of getting universities to listen. So that's another very brave battle that Maria is helping us to wage, to get the universities to wake up and listen. And I lived through the centers for centers for women's studies and centers for LGBTQ studies, and I've seen these revolutions happen before, and I want to see this happen. And Maria is one of the people making that happen. Now,
I would also, sorry.
Go ahead.
I would just also add one thing though that Sam asked, is that, it's not a zero-sum game. If indigenous people gain rights and privileges and recognition, it doesn't have to come at the cost of any other group. I think it's just having a larger table, everybody to be included. So I think the problem is we've looked at our policies and politics as a zero-sum game, that if one group gains something, then another has to lose, and I don't think that it has to be.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you.
Jamie, you're next, so go ahead and unblock your camera and your audio.
Hi, Maria. So I want to ask a question more about the different religious practices that are taught in the culture, and I wanted to know if any of the Buddhist and maybe shamanism, correct me if I'm wrong on the pronunciation, practices are taught in the schools and in the camps, even if they are shorter, because I know how important these religious practices can be to preserving culture and to connecting with ancestors. So I wanted to know if they are threaded into the curriculum.
Mm-hmm. In specifically at the Nomadic School of Creativity and the workshops, to be honest, we don't emphasize on the religious aspect yet, or I don't think we should, because most of the kids, even given their kind of urban background, they still, either attend temples, Buddhist temples with their families, or whether they, under guidance or with the help of a shaman, they with their families, they would undergo shamanic ceremonies and so forth. So in terms of this type of aspect, we don't include it in the curriculum yet. However, when we're working with the Snow Leopard project, at the end of the video, you saw a girl reading, a letter to Snow Leopard, apologizing on behalf of people.
Yes.
we have Norbu Lama, who's also in the video, the Buddhist monk, guide us through the schools. So he's opening, you know, the lectures with more of cultural and spiritual emphasis of Snow Leopard, because, you know, he's a divine deity or spirit of the Sayant Mountains and and such. And then it's important to esteem the snow leopard as a sacred animal, and you, the one who lives near it, has this tremendous responsibility, both spiritual and cultural. But that does not. But the I don't know, logistics wise, the snow leopard work is not really related to the nomadic school of creativity work. Now, nomadic school of creativity it's about arts and like music, what else, learning how to make traditional foods. I can put the picture there, how to assemble the yurt. However, there was another I just, yeah, you yes, a very interesting question. But in terms of the thematic school project, there's not much emphasis on the like religious aspects of culture, but other aspects.
Yes, thank you. I was really interested on just learning more about spirituality within the Buryat people, just because through the Center for Indigenous Cultures site that we researched, there was a lot of indication that there was a lot of, you know, spiritual practices and connecting to the land and meditation.
Yes, and we do so. It's just not through the nomadic school of creativity. It would be through the Snow Leopard project. It would be through the support of cultural and spiritual practitioners, through the ceremonies, and yeah.
Thank you. That's awesome. Thank you.
Thank you, Jamie.
Chris or Joubin, who do we have queued up next? For
Isha, go ahead.
Hey, hey Maria. Thank you so much for speaking with us today. So I basically had a question about the challenges that you might have faced, like some of the political and societal challenges that you faced when communicating the importance of preserving both the culture of the Buryat people and the environment. So yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I mean, there's definitely a lot of challenges when it comes to speaking with either local officials, authorities, you know, local governments, or whether it's the government of the republic. I mean, they just don't get the importance of the cow, you know, let's say the cow, because the thing is that the Boread cow, it of course it does produce, you know, dairy and meat products, but it's volume wise it's smaller than the European breed, and therefore they would see, oh, you know, this is a bad investment. But it's it's such a very narrow type of thinking, and I guess the biggest challenge that would be, you know, with it would be the cow project is just kind of very narrow-mindedness of the local government, and again, not everybody is on the same page. You know, not all farmers are on the same page, or they recognize the importance of having this breed. But there are farmers that recognize the importance of the breed and they want to be part of the movement. It's just we don't have enough cows to redistribute to the people yet. In terms of other, you know, the kind of bigger challenges, and just gonna be honest with you, it's very difficult to receive funding, especially like foreign funding. In Russia, if you're an NGO, there's a law that says, you know, if you can't really justify the reason why, you know, like let's say, and a foundation in America is sponsoring you, you can be labeled as a foreign agent, and you can get into a lot of trouble. But it's just, we found that, I mean, it's really difficult, but it's not that there are ways around it, but you just take that risk, and then you just, you know, you have your references, right? You have this as much of points of proof as possible, and then yeah, that's and just kind of hope for the best as for now. Another thing I would like to say is just that it's not easy to work in, let's say, and again, Russia does not really recognize our territory as being colonized. It recognizes our territory as being voluntarily annexed. It's like we voluntarily annexed ourselves to the Russian Empire, right? 350 plus years ago. And it's not easy to, and then we had 70 years of kind of Soviet regime that suppresses, you know, your traditional culture, traditional knowledge, your language, your spirituality, your religion, then they take away your animals. And then it's just, the change is not going to happen overnight in people's heads, right? There's this, and I make an argument for intergenerational trauma that is still present in all of us, not just Boread people, but Russian people as well, because Russia's been through a lot in the 20th century alone. You know, you have your revolution, you have the, you know, World War I, the revolution, then the Stalinist repressions, like millions, like tens, like millions of people who've been killed or put to prison when Stalin was in power. And then we have World War II, when like over, 20 million Soviet soldiers died. So it's like a lot of people died. And then we had a severe transition from Soviet Union to Russian Federation, like kind of semi-democratic, semi-capitalistic state, and still like a lot of challenges with that too. So it's just, at the end of the day, it's just, I think it's about people not being healed yet, you know, in Russia as a society. And I think that's the biggest challenge. Yeah.
Thank you.
Okay, and let me break in and say, Maria, I know it's getting past, it must be like 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning there. I kind of been leaving it up to each of our speakers how many questions they take. We could do one more and wrap then, or if you want to keep going. So I'm going to keep asking you as we kind of go along. Students, I know that some of you have other classes and other obligations, so you're not obligated to stay with us, but we can go long if Maria doesn't fall asleep on the other side of the planet in the cold and the darkness of Siberia at 2 o'clock in the morning. Maria, how are you feeling? You want to do one more question, or you want to do a few more questions? What's your feeling?
I'm as many questions as people as colleagues would like, and again, but being mindful of their own time, because they recognize, of course, people
So
have
again, officially we're kind of wrapping up, but unofficially we're going to keep going with some questions. So if you'd like to stick with us, that's great. Let's see if we can get a few more questions going.
Saba, go ahead.
Yeah, Saba's next.
Hi. So it's really evident from reading your articles and just from other things that I've read that Indigenous peoples across cultures are very connected to Mother Nature, and they're very connected to the land around them just because of how long they've been around and how long they've had to live in the areas that they are living in. So my question is, what do you think the world can learn from Indigenous people about respecting Mother Nature and respecting the world around them?
Yeah, thank you, Saba. I think the essence, it just goes down to that. It's, first of all, we're not the kings of nature, right? We're not the top of the pyramid. We are part of nature, and that's a very simple understanding, and yet it's a very complex one, especially for a world who's so reliant on the exploitation of nature. And I think perhaps maybe this pandemic will teach a thing or two about the importance of, about the thing that interconnectedness does exist, and it's not just, you know, a fancy word, and how little things are overlooked, and that we can't continue to exploit nature because that's, you know, we can't continue to exploit wildlife and just be mindful. And I think it will teach the importance of on how to, I don't know, what really matters, right? Because families are locked inside, and then, you know, for better or for worse, but people are rediscovering themselves, and they recognize, you know, maybe my, you know, my to question their day-to-day activities. Maybe we should not consume as much. Maybe we don't need that much. Maybe at the end of the day, we just need so little. And I think maybe now it's an opportunity that this shift may happen. Yeah, I'm very hopeful.
Thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Rachel, you're next.
Hi. One thing I want to say is that because your work is very extensive and very complicated, I was wondering if you can sum up and condense everything. What is the one thing that you would tell someone who has no idea about indigenous people, so they can have more respect for the indigenous group? Thank you.
Oh yeah, thank you, Rachel. I think it's just so important to I mean, wherever you are, like, I recognize that there are countries that are more let's say, that don't necessarily have indigenous groups, or you know, or don't want to recognize as such. But I think, for example, everyone knows that the troubles in Amazon rainforest, right? And once you start exposing yourself to at least on conservation issues, and luckily or not luckily, but what I've noticed is through the past several years, there have been more articles, more media exposure on indigenous people and conservation, and how indigenous people are frontliners. So Standing Rock, for example, or indigenous people's fights for Amazon rainforest, to defend Amazon rainforest, or the fires in Australia, which happened largely because of the loss of the traditional Aboriginal practices of, you know, the controlling of fires. So I think, you know, if one cannot or not interested in indigenous issues, one has to be interested by now in conservation issues, or at least, because it's, you know, you scroll down on Facebook, there should be at least one or two article on conservation issues somewhere in the world, and then you click the link, and then you read more, and so forth and so forth, and kind of gets you down to the rabbit hole, or I don't know how to phrase this, but again, everything is very interconnected, and you touch one subject, but it relates to so many more subjects. So maybe start with conservation.
Thank you so much.
Environmental issues. Yeah, thank you, Rachel.
Pablo, you're next.
Hello. So as someone from Tatarstan in Russia, learning Tatar language and culture was sort of forced upon us in a way. And most people really kind of most kids were left ignorant of that because we were tested and it was like a 5-day-a-week thing. And I was interested, how do you keep the culture learning process for the kids interesting and engaging, rather than what happened to us, where we were mandatorily, you know, thrown into something that we didn't even understand. And now I find myself not knowing anything about it. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Pavel. In regards to language, we don't emphasize it yet in our camps and workshops. But the thing is that in our approaches, in our methodologies, we bring kids as, again, we treat them like adults, basically. That's the secret. You treat them like an adult, you put them into decision-making processes, and in the camp, I mean, they themselves, they had to assemble the yurt, and they, that's a fantastic team building exercise, I think. And so they learned how to assemble the yurt and learned how each part is called, and each part is called in the Boread or Mongolian language. So they assembled the yurt, then they're talking to the elders, and the elders can talk in Russian, and then it's just make it as fun as possible. Like they it's very interactive, so everything is done by their own hands, whether it's the yurts or the traditional foods, the traditional dumplings and traditional pastry. And then the fact that they're traveling, from one country to another, as the camp of previous year. I mean, the road trip is always fun, right? It's such a journey. And then they came to Mongolia and stayed in another camp with lots of other children, Mongolian children. But then they would have this kind of private classes with the Mongolian artists and so forth. So it's just it's just you treat a child like he's an adult, and then you involve the child in the conversation, ask their opinion of why it matters. We also have a small film about the camp, and so maybe I can send the link later. In terms of language, I kind of get what you're saying of it being perceived as boring in schools. In Buryatia, unfortunately, there was, even though the Buryat language is an official language in Buryat Republic, it is taught in schools, but only maybe 2 times a week. And it's been a battle just to get it to that level. And even if it's taught, it's like an elective course, and nobody has time for that. So it's just, the situation is much, much worse. But now we see a lot of parents who are interested in teaching, the language, the culture to their children, because they recognize, because the language of the culture, your big piece of your identity is missing, and it's important to create new methodologies of teaching those threatened indigenous languages to children, and we're lacking such methodologies as of now.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Paul.
Jamie is next. Jamie, are you still there?
Hi. All right, so I'm just looking for my question, see if I still want to answer that. Ask that one again. Okay, so I wanted to know actually more about the UN conference where you talked about the sensitive and controversial topics, and just how an honor it was to be there and what it took to be able to speak there and what you talked about at that conference.
Yeah, thank you, Jamie. This was so UN hosts annually, every year, Indigenous Peoples Forum, where Indigenous people all over the world, they come to the UN and speak about their issues. And every year there's a theme. Let's say the theme is endangered indigenous languages, or the theme is something else, or to be honest, I'm so sorry, I forgot the theme of that specific, but nevertheless, we talked about the revival of Aboriginal Boread cow, both my colleague and I, and the importance of reintroducing it back to the Boread landscape. I basically said the exact same thing I said to you about the cows. Yeah.
Okay, and was there any like opposition to the Boread people having possession of the Aboriginal cows? Because before, like you're talking a little bit about like the mainstream type of cows, and like, was there any opposition to having true like Aboriginal cows?
I wouldn't say like opposition, but at the same time, when you don't have support from, you know, Ministry of Agriculture that is supposed to be kind of stepping in both of giving you financial resources, you know, or to conduct more research, because of course more research needs to be done. That is an obstacle itself, and the thing is with the, I don't want to go way into the politics, but the politics in Russia, within regions in Russia, is as such, they can't really do anything without permission of Moscow.
Okay.
The Kremlin. And if Kremlin says it's okay, then it's okay. But the thing is, Russia is so big, so by the time Kremlin says something, it's already like half a year passes or something, or a couple of years passes, and so forth. So it's very difficult. I mean, I kind of get where they're coming from, because that's how the political system is set. But at the same time, it's just, if they're being a little bit more proactive and lobby, like the cow, for example, at Kremlin, the process would go faster. But again, they're, as I said, they're a little narrow-minded, but you know, but that's the reality. Yeah.
That reminds me of one of Sam's question.
I'll throw in my quick geographic fact. When I was in Ulan-Ude with Maria, I was continually astonished to remind myself that the distance between where Maria is sitting now in Ulan-Ude and Moscow is further than the distance from Moscow to New York. And the sort of vastness of the Russian state is almost incomprehensible. And that's the fact that brings it home. And of course, she's not in the easternmost regions of Siberia at all. So if it's further from her to Moscow than New York to Moscow, you get an idea of how vast a region you have to communicate across. And now let's take more questions.
Thank you.
Parsa's next.
Yeah, so in the one article I read about the Boread people, I learned that bright colors were a big part of their culture. So what do they represent and symbolize? Because that hasn't been touched yet.
Oh, very interesting. It's a very interesting observation. I haven't really thought much about it, but we have to tie this to the fact when Tibetan Buddhism came to Buryatia in 18th century, and it came from Mongolia. So a lot of the color concepts came from Tibetan Buddhist traditions, such as 5 colors: blue, white, green, yellow, and red. So, for example, we have this tradition of offering khadak, and khadak is like a ceremonial scarf, and it's given to the most esteemed people. For example, a blue one is the most classical version, so you give it to, like, let's say Scott comes again next year or something. Like at the airport, I'm going to stand with the blue khadak, right? The symbol of welcoming, but if it was, for example, someone more older, or somebody with more, somebody's like somebody who deserves more esteem that Scott doesn't. I'm making bad analogy, but the white scarf would be like, oh my gosh, like the top of the top color. Like the yellow scarf would be offered to Buddhist monks. And then as for red and green, I think it's offered during a specific religious Buddhist ceremonies. In terms of clothes, again, it may be colorful, like Scott said, like it looks like a crimson color. I've never thought about it, but it's just this type of silk comes from China, and I don't know, whatever they bring to you, you buy, and then you sew the clothes in traditional way, and it's just so then it's colorful. Maybe that's an explanation. Sorry if I didn't answer.
Oh, you did. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, are you still feeling like you can go on? I know we're past the top of the hour, 5 minutes. So I'm just giving you another chance to decide that you need some sleep. But otherwise, you can keep going. How are you doing?
Yeah, maybe like 15 more minutes and 15 more minutes.
So
yeah.
generous with your time. Thank you. It's the middle of the night. Thank you very much.
Does anyone else have any questions? So I have a question. Oh, Jobin, do you want to go ahead? Oh, okay. I think like a lot of indigenous people don't really get represented in like the mainstream media. Like for example, I think just regarding the topic of climate change, there's like Greta Thunberg as well as this 19-year-old Brazilian climate activist that rarely got discussed outside of like a few programs like Democracy Now! How do you think you can bring like indigenous people's culture to the mainstream media? And why do you think a lot of these news outlets and media sources don't necessarily represent indigenous people as much as they should?
Mm-hmm. It's a very interesting question. Well, for starters, it will depend. Well, first of all, of course, I cannot really speak for all indigenous people. Only for
just
my
the Buryat, okay.
Yeah, Buryat context. Yeah. Well, there's probably a couple of things. One is maybe a certain tribe, let's say even with Boread, or a certain clan would not even like to be exposed, in mainstream media. So that has to be, of course, respected. Second is that Greta Thunberg, she actually used her platform. She was in one very fancy climate meeting, I forgot which one. And of course, all journalists gathered, but she also brought indigenous youth activists on the stage. So instead of her talking, those guys were talking, the indigenous youth activists. So I thought it was really, really cool.
It was at the UN. It was at the UN climate talk last September. It's the same one that they made a meme of her when she was hissing at Donald Trump.
Oh, so I guess it's a very legendary meeting then. So if we can have, the situation is improving. I think again, especially with with internet and social media, there's a bit more exposure. But again, only if you're subscribed to certain news or groups and so forth, and things go viral much faster than anything else in history. It's just probably, again, I when you think about this, not a lot of truly important topics go out there in the media to begin with. That's the question of how to change in media, media and news sources. But it's very difficult, and I don't really have an answer for that. But I guess my recommendation is that for indigenous groups, at least in my region, is to be proactive in social media, and not only and also use other languages. Maybe we should write more in English, like really, and maybe we should make more, emphasize more on the digital story making, and also publish it in different languages. I mean, that's how we'll get that representation, and maybe not wait until somebody does it for you. Like thank you, Greta, of course, but we can't really wait until next, celebrity gives us a platform. We have to take it ourselves. and it's very difficult to do it through traditional media. So that's why perhaps digital media and internet would be the solutions to this.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Chris.
Do we have any questions? We're down to just about 8 people now. So
I think yeah.
If there's one more question, we could take it, or that's not a bad place to wrap either. So is anybody feeling like they want to unmute themselves and ask one more question, or shall we let Maria get some sleep finally? Let's see if anybody's popping in. Okay, well, I think I'll go ahead and wrap it up for us. Again, thank those of you that lingered longer. This is what happens in a real room. Maria was in the Hearthside room on Foothill College campus last November as we were remembering together. It's kind of amazing. That was amazing. It was amazing to have you there physically, but this is also a kind of miracle to have you coming literally from Ulan-Ude in the middle of the night in the Siberian spring. So thank you for being with us. I'm going to remind the audience that will watch this asynchronously, because we will be posting all the recordings. But I'm going to remind the audience that the API Heritage Month schedule is on foothill.edu, and we have API resource links. We will also have links to all of the archive videos, and if you scroll down in this page, then you will also find all the other authors and speakers that are coming to us in the remainder of April. So please join us for that. Next week we'll have Viola Lesmana, another Foothill graduate who's a professor at USC, for example. And Andrew Land is joining us next week for the 45th anniversary of the fall of Saigon from Ho Chi Minh City. So thank you very much, Maria, for being here. And we'll go ahead and end the meeting and wave goodbye to you and let you get some sleep. And we will look forward to hosting you in person again after the quarantine. And thank you so much for being a part of our lives and part of our school, and for all the kind words for Foothill College that you've said.
Yeah, thank you so much, Scott. Thank you, Chris. And I'm sorry, Jubin, if I mispronounce your name. Thank you so much for supporting my talk today, and to all of the students, audience that have listened today. Thank you so much, and stay well.
Thank you again for coming.
Stay safe.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you, and have a great day.
How do we contact you if we have any more questions about your
sure.
project?
Just through my email. Let me put this in the chat, and of course Scott has it as well.
Yeah.
I'll be happy to answer any questions